Okay. So, all right, I've been talking a lot about the Mount Vernon Industrial Development Agency. Let me just say out of the gate, I'm here as an individual, as a resident of the city, who has been looking at activities at the Mount Vernon Industrial Development Agency pretty closely now for a few years. I am a trustee of the Mount Vernon City School District as of July 1, 2024. I started a 3-year term. I obviously do not speak for the board when I'm here right now. As one of my assignments as a trustee member is assigned as a non-voting member of the Mount Vernon Industrial Development Agency Board. So I do sit at those meetings. I began that in the fall, but obviously I'm not here representing that board either. I'm here, as a concerned educator and taxpayer in the city of Mount Vernon. Yesterday, I released a report sort of summarizing projects to the best of my ability. We don't have clear sight all the way back to these projects. So you can see here on the left, these are the projects that I've been able to find information about by looking at the Mount Vernon Industrial Development Agency audited financial statements that go back to 2016. There's a report from 2014, but that one didn't have detailed information. So I didn't, and there's nothing for 2015 and nothing prior to that. So I was able to pull this information. I tried my best to figure out which were the housing projects. Some are known to me. There were a couple I'm not clear about, like these two here, these Heritage North and South. If anybody knows anything about these, this is a particular concern to me, this Heritage South one, because look at that. This one, it gets a huge property tax exemption. So I'd like to know about that. Also, it's a little troubling that we don't know when a lot of these started. Some of them we know when they started. I was able to find that information from the 2014 report, like this King's Court, Macedonia. An interesting thing that happens, you can see King's Court now is based on its assessment. The pilot that is paying is more than its assessment. That's how you get to a negative number here. The way these are set up is they're kind of front loaded. So the newer projects are going to be getting more of a break than the older projects. In theory, that's the way it should work. So that when a project is starting out, it needs more assistance. And then as it finds its feet and it's more successful, as it gets towards the end of this exemption period given by the IDA, it doesn't get as much exemption. It's playing closer to its full taxes. The troubling thing is the length of time. 30 years is a huge, I mean, it's just impossible to hold anybody accountable over that period of time. Anybody who struck the deal is gone. Anybody who works at the company is probably gone. So we're though left holding the bag, and you can see we're left holding an enormous bag. Just over this interval of time, 2016 to 2023, and across these projects, which I was able to find information on, we lost $34 million across the county, the city, and the school district. Mostly the school district and the city, a small amount, around, I think it's around 10% to the county. It's really like about 60, 40, 60, 30, 10. Is that right? 60, 30, 60, 40, something like it's like 60% to the school district, and then the other 40%, 30% is that is the city, and 10% is the county. No small sum. Here are my data sources. What I did after I put this together, I decided I wanted to take a closer look to just try and hammer this point home. So that's what I'm going to look at today. I just put this together. Let me increase the size of it. Okay. So we're going to just walk through this, and I'll show you some of the source data that I used to put this together. Okay. So this shows the 1 year impact. I took 2023, which we have the most recent financial statement from the IDA. And I just took a few of the projects that I know are housing projects that the IDA has given these long-term, these 30-year so-called payments in lieu of taxes. And that means, just as it sounds, instead of paying your property taxes, you make a payment in lieu of that directly to the IDA. So rather than if I was a project of the IDA, rather than paying taxes to the school district and the city and the county, and the county is done via the school via the city, rather than doing that, I would make a single payment to the Industrial Development Agency as a project of the Industrial Development Agency. Literally, that's how it works. Because remember, the Industrial Development Agency is a New York State public benefit corporation, and as such, it doesn't pay any taxes. So what it has the ability to do is say, it takes me on, and I basically get the shelter of being part of the IDA for a period of time. During that period of time, while I'm sheltered by the IDA, I don't pay taxes. But instead, make a payment in lieu of taxes to the IDA. The IDA then turns and makes a payment to the city, the county, and the school district. The problem is they negotiate how much that payment's going to be. And as you'll see, as you can see already, it is far less than the real property taxes they would be allowed to pay. And the fact that these deals are handed out over 30-year periods of time to housing developments, particularly for people who are on the economic margin, who are not making a lot of money, it's really, you can't make an argument that that leads to what the spirit of the IDA, which is to create long-term jobs and to improve the economic circumstances of the community in which the IDA exists. So these projects, I don't see how anyone could argue that they fulfill the mission. But let's walk through this. I picked these five. The first thing I need to know to do this, so what I'm going to try and do is figure out what the loss is. So the first thing here is the number of Mount Vernon City School District students living in each of these buildings. So number one down here, the source, this is the actual enrollment provided by the Mount Vernon City School District. I was able to get that data from the school district. Because I sit on the board and I sit on the board of the Industrial Development Agency, this has been a concern of ours, that they get an accurate count. I made a video about what's called a multiplier. That's basically a fraction that you use to multiply across the units in a building to get an estimate of how many students are likely to be enrolled. So if you have 100 students, if you have 100 units in a building and you have a multiplier of 0.25, that means you're saying that about for every 4 units, there's going to be 1 student, right? 0.25. So that's basically how it's done. There has been some arguing back and forth between the school district, me, on the IDA board, and other board members, and the company hired to do the economic impact analysis. And again, I've put videos up on YouTube about that. To be conservative, I'm using actual numbers here. That takes any guesswork of the multiplier out. This is what actual enrollment. Now, one thing to note is this is enrollment based on November 2024. And I'm comparing that to the financial statement of 2023. So there's going to be a little bit of variation. You might argue that a year ago in 2023, there were fewer students in each of these buildings. You could make that argument. But I don't think it's going to be enough to overcome the funding gap. That's the important thing. So there might be a little bit of variation. But it's by and large, I think these numbers are sound. I think the rationale behind them works. So I got access to, obviously I don't know who, I just know the gross number of students living in each one of these Mount Vernon IDA projects as of a snapshot, November 2024. So I need that. So once I know the number of students, the next thing I need to know is the cost per pupil to local taxpayers. Remember, school funding in New York State and in Mount Vernon schools is a combination of funding from the federal government, around 10%, the state, which is somewhere around half, and then the balance of it is local taxpayer funded. So what I need to do is strip out the state and federal money and just go with the cost to local taxpayers. And my source there too is using the economic impact analysis from stores. One advantage of doing that is I'm conservative. So I'm using their numbers, right? This is their assumption. So I think they kind of lowball it, but I use theirs. But let me go over and just show you that quickly, what I'm talking about. So page 8 of the store's report there were two reports, one for 115 South McQuestion and one for Q West. These were two projects that were approved in 2024. It's a little busy. You have to get used to reading these reports. I sadly have gotten used to reading the reports, so I can move around them pretty easily. So I use the method that stores use. So she talks about stripping out the portion of funding that is for per pupil funding that comes from the state and the federal government, which is fine. When you do that, this is what you get to. So this is the number that she's using for per pupil funding. That's an all-in number. I think that's probably low, but fine, we'll accept her number. So she comes up with the spending per pupil, and then she basically says that the Mount Vernon portion of it, the local taxpayer portion of the funding is 47%. Okay. So that's what we're going to use. We're going to use 47%. The Q West report and the report from 115 South McQuestion was virtually the same. There's a tiny difference here, but I just took the average of those two, and that's how you get. So here's the Q West comes to 9,337, the McQuestion 9,424. You take the average and you get 9,381. I think that's a pretty good number. And again, it's very conservative. The load for local taxpayers is probably higher than that, but we'll go with their conservative numbers. So once I have the number of students in a building and I have the local taxpayer cost, the portion of your taxes that go to school funding. I'm sorry, this is the cost to the school district, the local cost that comes out of the local portion of taxes to fund the students. I just multiply those two together to get the annual cost to local taxpayers to educate these students. So you multiply 31 by 9,381, you get 290,796 for LaPorte. This is Gramerton Ave, or the mysteriously named Blue Rio. So here we go. So here are these 5 projects. Here are the number of students living in each one of these projects in November of 2024. This is that cost per pupil, the local tax cost per pupil to educate a student. And by the way, this is because our enrollment is low. All this costs are the straight education costs. You don't have to if your school buildings were at capacity and you're running these projects, what the stores report would do is factor in a cost to hire more teachers. If you had to build a new school building, you would factor that in. You don't have to do any of that because you can absorb them in, but still there's a local cost, and this is that local cost to educate each student. So there you go. There's your total annual cost to local taxpayers. Just multiply students by the local taxpayer cost. Then the next column here, this is the pilot. So this is the payment made by the developer instead of paying their property taxes. 3, the source for that is the Mount Vernon Industrial Development Agency audited financial statements. And we'll look at 2023. Let me go over and just show you. Let's go here. Let's go to. So we go to the City of Mount Vernon, we go to departments, we go to the Industrial Development Agency, public documents, and here are your financial reports, okay? So, and just you're like, oh, it goes to 2018, 2016, I think it's in archived, it might be here. Yeah, here are your archive reports, but I'm comparing it to 2023. So to find the information, right, we're looking for the real property tax and the pilot information. We go to this report, and then we have to go to supplemental schedules, which are in the back. So we're going to go down here to other information. And so now what we can do is say, okay, so we can take, let's take one of the projects. 22 South West Street is one of the projects that I'm looking at. So here are the real property taxes. We'll see those in a minute. Here are the payment in lieu of taxes. So right out of the gate, you can see their total, if they didn't get any assistance from the IDA, they would pay $675,000 in taxes, 403 to the school district, 196 to the city, and 74,000 to the county. So that's what their property taxes are. Instead, the payment in lieu of taxes, right? What they're actually paying is a total of 165,000. So you can see it's massively lower. Okay. So anyway, so here's the $100,688 in the school pilot. So I want to go back over and show you for that project. Remember that number 100, so you can just see for what was that 22 South? There it is, 100,688. So I had to pull that data from the schedules, that schedule here for the different projects. You can see there's Blue Rio, so we can verify that. Blue Rio, 56,219 is the pilot for Blue Rio. Let's see, there it is, 56,219 for Blue Rio. Okay, so there's my source. I pulled it straight from the IDA financial statements. So here we have the number of students, are the actual students that are living there as of November 2024. The cost per pupil funded by local property taxes. I pulled it straight from the IDA economic impact analysis, their numbers. Okay, total cost is just multiplying those two sources. The pilot, right? This is what the developer actually paid. Instead of paying their school taxes, they paid these numbers, okay? This, again, this comes straight from the Industrial Development Agency financial statement. And then the funding gap, okay? This is the difference between what they paid and what it actually cost local taxpayers to finance the local portion of education for these students. So 290,000 minus 56,000, this is the gap. Okay, so this is the annual impact of the payment in lieu of taxes handed out by the Mount Vernon Industrial Development Agency, a full portion of local property taxes. And this is just 5 projects for 1 year. All right, this is just 1 year. Okay, 5 projects. Remember, as I showed, there were many, many more than 5 projects that are financed. So this is the gap that we are left with, that local property taxpayers are left with. Down here, what I wanted to show is suppose they didn't get this tax break from the Mount Vernon Industrial Development Agency. You're able to still see it, Sue? Okay. So if school taxes were not exempted by the Mount Vernon Industrial Development Agency, right? If, in other words, they built these housing projects, but they had to pay the full taxes the way everybody else has to pay full taxes, that funding gap would drop from this $1.15 million. It would drop from that number to 132,000, right? Still a little gap, but a ninefold. It's like a drop of 90%, something like that. So yeah, so let me just walk you through that. No, you don't need any new data to come up with this, right? In those financial statements, now what I've pulled was the actual property taxes. Recall that we saw that. Let's go and verify one. So LaPorte, it doesn't matter. Oakwood Gardens. Let's go see Oakwood Gardens. So 100 there, what they should have paid in taxes was 174,000. This is the school portion, 174,000. We know what they did actually pay was 46,000. So let's remember those numbers, 174 and 46. Let's go back over to the financial report and find Oakwood Gardens. It's going to be down here. It's alphabetical. Okay. So here's the real property tax, the school portion. There it is, 174,000. Instead, what they paid, the 46,000. All right, those are the numbers that we just looked at. Okay, so those numbers are, so I have those numbers. So now to figure out how bad this deal is for us and how great it is for them, what they would have paid, right? They would have paid $1.3 million. Remember what they actually paid, $23,000. Okay. Here's the total annual cost. I just pulled the same data here, the total annual cost to educate those kids. And then you can figure out the gap. So in some of these, LaPorte, if they paid their full taxes, it would have been a net positive in that year based on this number of students. Very, very much closer to the actual cost. Grace would have still been in the red. Um, wow, they would have dropped a little bit, but they're still in the red. 22 Southwest, closer, so on and so forth. Over here, but so here's the gap. It drops from this 1.15 million to 132,000. So it makes a big difference. That is close enough that in any given year, if you're paying your property taxes, some years it might be a little bit better for the school district. Some years there's going to be a little bit gap, but over the long haul, it's a much more rational system. It's much closer. Um, I added this column here to show the financial benefit to the corporation at our expense, right? So this gap, we've got to make up this gap, right? We're left with this gap because these corporations didn't pay their taxes. But what they do is they get the benefit, right? So they get the difference, right? What they actually paid, the pilot, the difference between their actual taxes and their pilot gives them a net $1 million, right? So this is money that hits their bottom line. Um, I think this is a real problem. I think that's pretty good. Let me stop sharing my screen. I think that's all I wanted to say about this. I'll probably what I'll probably do is take that and I think the comments are off, so I don't think there's any way to. Oh, are there comments? Let me see. Let me go over and see. Uh, sorry, I'm not very good at this. I'm going to go over and see if there's any comments. Let's see. All right, so Soren, it seems like you could draw a straight line between some of the people unable to pay their property taxes and the burden the tax deficit these pilots have put on their back. Yeah, I mean, listen, it's an excellent point. So, in my view, you can draw a line from the financial problems that the city and the school district are having. You can draw a line to the doorstep of the Mount Vernon Industrial Development Agency. There are some projects that I think probably are meritorious. So namely ones that are not housing. Um, so, this Ace Natural Foods, you could argue our Christmas tree, the American Christmas tree, Target, things that are actually that have the potential to generate jobs and sales tax revenue for the city. Um, what we're told instead by these. Oh, actually, I didn't share my screen, but I was talking through it. We're told by developers when they go to the Mount Vernon IDA and they're looking for tax breaks. We're told that the tax breaks are well worth it to the community. Their sales pitch is that, oh yeah, sure, you'll lose some taxes short term, but in the long term, these it's well worth it because we're going to transform your city. All right, we're going to generate massive economic impacts for your city. It's going to be transformative. Listen for that word. You will hear them say that. Go listen to them pitch before the city council or the IDA. That word they love to say, transformative, right? Um, and of course, they always dance around the topic of low-income housing. When they go to get the money from the federal government and the state, that's all they talk about is low-income housing. But when they're out selling these projects, they really manipulate perception around that. But yeah, so in my view, we're these projects will never pay for themselves. Um, what's worse is I've tried to get information going back to these projects that were granted back in 2003, 2007, 2008. They started receiving these deep discounts going back that far. And the IDA has told me that they don't have the paperwork for that, which is truly extraordinary. And it makes you wonder, if they don't have that, how do we know that the numbers that they're paying us are accurate? I mean, so those numbers that we're seeing for pilot payments for projects that started, 2 decades ago, if they don't have the paperwork to support those numbers, then where are they? Is it just that the developer's paying those and we're accepting their word for it? There are a lot of troubling problems here that have to be accounted for. And for me, the fact that we just approved two more that are identical, virtually identical to the ones that I just showed you. And this is not to knock the need for affordable housing. This is to knock how it's being financed. What the question is, why are local property taxpayers and why is the local public school district being asked to finance um, the shortage of housing that is regional, statewide, and nationwide? People, one, two, or three rungs up the economic ladder from people who are, very, very on the margin economically and struggling to find housing, can't afford market rate housing. Why are Mount Vernon residents who are two or three rungs up the economic ladder being asked to finance this? And again, it's not like we're financing a not-for-profit to make this work. This money is going to for-profit corporations, right? This is a capitalist endeavor on the part of they're not doing it for fun, right? They're not doing it because they're nice guys. They're in it to make money, right? If this project is not accretive to their earnings, they will not do it. So when they say the project wouldn't go forward without the assistance, that just means it doesn't meet their expectation for profits. Why is that my concern? Why should any resident in the city being like, oh, okay, well, it's important that they get their profit. Gee, I'm sorry, I didn't know it was about your profit. I'll take a hit on my taxes so it's accretive to your bottom line. It's just absolute. It's nonsense, and we shouldn't be asked to tolerate it. So if they were giving 10-year pilots to build market rate condos, you could make a much better argument that the cost benefit ratio comes out on the plus side for the community. This is nowhere near that. What this is corporate welfare, straight up, a good old fashioned corporate welfare. It advances a housing agenda that Kathy Hochul has, but it's being done on the backs of local tax-paying residents and school children, which I find offensive. Anyway, I'm going to end it here. All right, bye-bye.